بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين اللهم صل وسلم وبارك على سيدنا محمد النبي الأمي وعلى آله وأصحابه أزواجه وذرياته ومن اهتدى بهديه واستنى بسنته وانتهج نهجه إلى يوم الدين. تركنا المحجة البيضاء ليلها كنهارها لا يزيغ عنها إلا هالك وبعد. So, Alhamdulillah, Barakallah fikum, may Allah bless you all. We are continuing this new set of classes or sessions that we began last week, entitled The Journey is Destination, Knowing the Way or the Path of the Knowers of God or the Arifin Billah. And we have selected a particular text called Qutb al-Arifin, or the Pole of the Knowers. Pole here in the sense like a guiding pole, like the North Star. So it's kind of a manual, so to speak, or a guide to see what is involved in trying to traverse the path to God, to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And that's mainly dealing with our own inadequacies and our shortcomings. But before all of that, which is the second set of chapters we'll look at, called Tahdhib al-Riyada. So inculcating adab and inculcating comportment and etiquette within the mannerisms and the goings on of the nafs, of the lower soul. That's the second portion. But the first part that we're reading and we're looking at is looking at the very basic foundation, which is who is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And the author here, Abu Qasim Abdul Rahman al-Najai, he begins by following the methodology of the vast majority of theologians, which is to negate that which is inappropriate for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And so kind of the first obstacle is really knowing who Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is. And before we can know who he is, we have to know what he is not. Because the tendency amongst people, just as a general issue, is that we tend to kind of think of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala as some sort of, human-like or anthropomorphic-like figure. And so when we read about, and the nice thing that he's going to do in the later chapters, in this set of chapters, he's going to actually look at verses of the Quran that seem to indicate that there's some human-like or anthropomorphic-like quality to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and then go through each one of those to try to show us what it actually means. And so, the only frame of reference that we have is the one that's unique to us, which is the human one, which is firmly planted in time and space, and also circumscribed by the language that we use to communicate with one another. And though I would say the majority or the consensus opinion is that language is divine in origin. In other words, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, he is a source of language too. When he says to Adam in the Quran, or to the angels about Adam, our first prophet and first man, وَعَلَّمَ آدَمَ الْأَسْمَاءَ كُلَّهَا, and he taught Adam all of the names. So here they said this could mean all of the names in the primordial languages, the original languages, right? And then from those original languages, other languages came about. So Arabic is a form of an original language, but maybe not the exact original, or at least the Arabic that we know today. And it is likely the oldest Semitic language, right? Spoken by Sam, the son of Noah. So it's a very old language, an ancient language. And there are other ancient languages as well, Abyssinian, and the European languages actually are very new, quite new, and the Romance languages are derived from Latin. And then you have the Indo-European languages like German and English and so forth that also have similar roots. But the point is, our ability to communicate and how we communicate is very much also based in a temporal time frame. So even when we talk about Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, we use words that usually refer to something human-like or something temporal. So we have to then understand them in a way that's appropriate for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, rather than understanding them in their very kind of simple linguistic sense that applies to human beings. So Therefore, we have to elucidate the concepts. That's why the author is taking this time to show this in the beginning. I think it's very important and, inshallah, very beneficial. So we had reached the section, the one before that, we talked about the difference between pre-eternal attributes or eternal attributes and temporal attributes. And we mentioned that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is not circumscribed, and that circumscribed means he's not limited by time or space. Those don't apply to him, or direction. And this is much different than the created beings. So in the next section, he says, رضي الله عنه, فصل في نفي القبلية والبعدية عن الله سبحانه. So this is the negation of, I'm going to make up a word here, but just to illustrate what he's trying to say, of beforeness and afterness. So before and after can apply to space and it can apply to time. Here he's talking about time. So this is basically trying to address the question, when was Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? And see, the question itself is problematic because when indicates that there was a beginning somewhere. And when also would indicate there's an ending somewhere. But both of these things are inappropriate, right? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is beyond those two things. So he says, فَاللَّهُ عَزَّ وَجَلَّ أَزَلِيٌّ قَدِيمٌ. And these words are mustalahat. If you look for these words in the hadith of the Prophet ﷺ in this manner, you would not find them. And then you might say, well, why would we not find them? Didn't the Sahaba and the companions and the Prophet ﷺ know these concepts that you're talking about? And why then would they not have words for them? And the answer to that is that there came a point in time, historically speaking, where foreign or alien theologies came into the discourse or to the Muslim discourse. Early on, in the early Islamic discourse, in the Arabian Peninsula, there was no kind of concept of thinking about Allah is before or after or in time or outside of time. Their theology actually prior to this was quite simple. Perhaps you would even use the word primitive compared to, say, the Byzantine Empire and the theology of Christianity and Judaism, or compared to the Persian Sassanid Empire that also had a fairly sophisticated philosophical system. So, and in fact, some of our ulama, like Shahid al-Mihrab, Dr. al-Ghuti, rahimahullah, in his book Fiqh al-Sirah, he mentions that one of the wisdoms behind why the Risala came to the mission, came originally to the Arabian Peninsula, not say to like China or the Byzantines or Bani Israel, the children of Israel, as it came to all of the prophets prior to that, virtually came from Bani Israel. The reason for that is there was a simplicity about the Arabian Peninsula and also a sort of doctrinal purity. So even though they worshipped idols, idol worship was a cultural thing. It wasn't really a theological issue. And you see that in the Quran when they say, why, how can we leave these idols, and these are what our forefathers have been doing. Right? That was their refrain. This is what we found our forefathers doing. So they didn't really offer a theological justification for worshiping idols. They couldn't say, oh, we believe this is the haqq, or this is the truth. No, this is what our forefathers were doing. So there was a cultural attachment to that, affiliation with that. So there was a simplicity and also, like we said, a doctrinal purity. So they didn't have a need at the time to use these terms. Later on, when other theologies then began coming into the discourse, because people from outside the Arabian Peninsula started to accept Islam, then there was a need for this to talk about these issues. So when he says, "Allah Azza wa Jal azaliyun qadim," here's this word azal that has a linguistic meaning that is different than what is meant here. And qadim, right? And qadim just means ancient. So it doesn't mean that Allah is just merely ancient in a linguistic sense. It means qadim without beginning, right? It means ancient without beginning. Well, azal means a word that they use to try to elaborate, or I should say not elaborate, but try to indicate or signify a time before time, which actually wasn't time, right? Because if we define time, as being something that's measurable via the حركات الأفلاك والكواكب and so forth, like the movement of celestial bodies and planets, and that's kind of how we tell time. And the Quran mentions this, that the moon phases and so forth, and this is so that we can tell time, and the Quran mentions that. Then before all of those things were created, then there was no concept of time. But then how do we indicate when that was, when there was no time before that? So they use this word al-azal, right? So when they say Allah azaliyun qadim, and inshallah, I think we need to have English equivalents of these words, and maybe some people have tried with them, but I haven't really looked at that. Qadim, sometimes they translate as pre-eternal, but al-azal, I'm not really sure how one would translate that, which is kind of the pre-eternal time, I suppose you could call it. So Allah He was there before anything was there, and He is Qadim. In other words, He always was there without a beginning. And then He explains it a little bit here. واسم القديم لله عز وجل موضوع للقدم الأبدي الذي ليس قبله قبلية ولا له سبحانه بداية أوجد منها نفسه بل هو دائم في قدمه بلا بداية ينتهي إليها قدم بل قدمه دائم قبل وجود الخلق بلا بداية كدوام بقائه بعد وجود الخلق بلا نهاية فلما استحال عليه سبحانه أن تكون لبقائه نهاية استحال أيضا أن تكون لقدمه بداية يتعالى عن ذلك علوا كبيرا. So he said this word al-qadim, pre-eternal, ancient, it's a word, ism al-qadim, it's a term that has موضوعا للقدم, in other words, to indicate pre-eternality, al-abadi, everlasting pre-eternality. So before anything came about and after everything leaves, there will still be Allah. Basically, that's the best way to say it. So al-qidam al-abadi, abadi means everlasting. الذي ليس قبله قبلية, the one where there's no before his beforeness, because Allah cannot be described as before, right? ولا له سبحانه بداية أوجد منها نفسه, nor does Allah have a beginning from which forth He brought about His own existence. That's also impossible for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, because that's sifat al-hawadith. That's created beings have this beginning in their existence. Allah had no beginning to His existence. بل هو دائم في قدمه بلا بداية. Rather, He always was in His pre-eternality without a beginning. ينتهي إليها قدمه. So his beginninglessness didn't have a beginning. That's how I would say. His beginninglessness is without beginning. That itself didn't have a beginning. So I hope I'm not confusing people more than explaining here. بل قدمه دائم قبل وجود الخلق. Rather, his beginninglessness has always been there even before the existence of creation. بلا بداية, without a beginning. كدوام بقائه بعد وجود الخلق. In the same manner, the continuance or the everlasting nature of His everlastingness after the existence of creation, after creation goes away, without end. That's also in the same way. فلما استحال عليه سبحانه تكون بقاء نهاية, so when it was impossible, conceptually, logically, intellectually speaking, ontologically also, in other words, it's an extra mental reality, so it's not just something to think about in our head, no, it's actually the way it is in the real world, right, في الحقيقة. فلما استحال عليه سبحانه تكون ببقائه نهاية, so just like it was impossible for His everlastingness to have an end, استحال أيضا تكون لقدمه بداية. In the same manner, His beginningless also never had a beginning. And again, it's difficult to wrap your head around that rationally speaking. That's why we call it a negation. This is why these are negative attributes. So al-qidam wal-baqa, we put them in the negative attributes, which means they are things that Allah is not. So what is the opposite of qidam? Huduth. Right? The opposite of being ever there from the beginning is something that came into existence. That's what we call huduth. That's what we call coming into existence. So Allah is not that. And also, by the same token, al-baqa means to be everlasting without an end. And that's also يقابله الانتهاء أو الحدوث. So something also that has an end. So everything that is hadith, everything that has a beginning, in other words, has come into existence, conceptually, we can see that it also has an end. So then the question might arise, well, aren't human souls immortal in a sense? That when we die, or human spirit, I should say, is immortal when we die? Doesn't it continue on after this? So isn't that like baqa? And we would say there's a difference between the intrinsic or the inherent baqa, everlastingness, and one that is done so by the permission of the one who has an inherent everlastingness. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in of himself, by his own nature, will always be there. We only have baqa, right? We only have a continuance even after death in a manner that is forever, either inshallah in heaven, or ma'azallah, not in the other place, by Allah's permission, right? By virtue of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala granting us that too, by bequeathing us that to us, not by virtue of our own natures. It's not an inherent thing, but as long as we had a beginning, then we can envision an end. And you can say the same thing about the mountains and the rivers and the star and the moons and the sun. If all of those things had a beginning, then you can conceptualize that they will have an end. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will bring them to an end. How do we know they're going to end? Two things. One, the Quran tells us so, that everything will be destroyed. And two, we know that conceptually, in the realm of ontological possibility, in the realm of possibility for the waqa, in the reality, we know that is possible and not impossible, because the sun's existence is not a necessary one. Allah didn't have to create the sun. He didn't have to create the moon. Actually, he didn't have to create anything. So the only necessary existence is that of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So I know this sounds a little bit technical, and I apologize for kind of using those words, but one of the things that's interesting that they say the simpler the thing something is, then usually the more words and more elaborate you need to be in explaining it, right? So, logic, which kind of is the groundwork for many of this, is quite simple in terms of its concepts, but the words that are used to explain it are many, because we're trying to explain something that should be kind of second nature or innate in our ability to grasp it, to understand it. That's why the Prophet ﷺ said, or reported to have said, "Alaykum bidin al-ajayz," have the religion of the old women, which means those who they believe, and they don't need to go into all of this level of detail, or the religion of the Arabi, of the desert Bedouin, who reported to have said, I see prints of the camel, and I see his ba'ara, and I see his droppings, and I know a camel has been there. So what's the difference between that? And I see mountains and rivers and sun and moon and stars, then I know that Allah was there. That's how simple it is. And as we saw in the beginning, that's kind of how the Shaykh described it. So this is sometimes called the teleological argument, like looking at the sana, looking at the perfection and the order of the cosmos, and also within the human being, gives us a lot of insight into this cannot come by itself. And that's why in the beginning he said there are two types of things you find in the dunya. You find things that clearly it looks like human beings made it, so buildings and cars and tables and trucks and museums, and you don't even know who the architect was, or who the builders were, or what countries they came from, or what materials they used, but certainly there was human ingenuity and human efforts behind it. It's clear, and no one has to show you the time-lapse video of how they built it. You just know that. And then there are certain things certainly that no human could have done. There's any concept of a human could have built the moon or the sun or the earth itself or the mountains or anything like that. So that's how he compares the two. So the next section, he says, فَصْلٌ فِي نَفْيِ الْحَرَكَةِ وَالسُّكُونِ عَنِ اللَّهِ سُبْحَانَهُ. So all of these next several sections, and they're not that long, hopefully we'll get through them this week and maybe the week after that, they are negations, right? So
basically the central principle that they say in terms of understanding Allah is anything that you can think of, you can imagine in your head of what Allah is, He is not. He can't be that, because by the very virtue of you being able to imagine it means that you are looking at it in the frame of created beings. And since Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is not a created being, then certainly He's not going to be the thing that you imagined. That's why they say al-ajizu an al-idraki idrak, which is the section that comes later. Al-ajizu, so an al-idrak idrak. So your own awareness of your inability to understand Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that is the epitome of knowing God, right? Of idrak, of understanding Allah. So admitting your humility and your incapacity to say, Allah, how can I understand ma huwa qadim wa la hadith? How can I properly have a concept of who He is, utterly anything unlike us and not bounded and limited by anything that human beings are limited by? How can I possibly understand such a being? And the same, holds true even for understanding the prophets. How can I possibly understand a prophet, especially the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, who is not like any other human being that we know? And that's why they say only Allah can know Allah. Who is the human being who knows Allah the most and will ever know Allah the most? Muhammad ﷺ, and then the rest of the prophets. But does even the Prophet ﷺ know Allah like Allah knows Himself? No, we can't say that. Only Allah knows Himself as He is to be properly known. And the Prophet ﷺ admitted this, right, in his dua. لا نحصي ثناء عليك أنت كما أثنيت على نفسك. You are to be praised as you praised yourself. We cannot properly praise you because we can't properly know you. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala doesn't burden us with knowing Him as He knows Himself, because that's impossible, right? لا نكلف نفسا إلا وسعها is the ayah al-muhkama in the Quran, the commanding verse. We will not burden a soul with that which more than it can bear. Here, it doesn't mean like some people think, like a trial or a burden or some type of life calamity. No, it means Allah will not burden you with something that's impossible, literally impossible for you to bear. So to know Allah as Allah knows Himself is not required. What is required is to know Allah in as much as is humanly possible, in as much as you are capable of. Even to know Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala as the Prophet knows Him is not the burden that Allah puts upon us. We may strive for that when we try to reach it, and it's an apex we'll never reach, but it's something to shoot for, right? It's something to aspire to. But we know that the path to knowing Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the one that's going to mimic the path of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, that's for sure. So, and then how would we not know? We would know anything. We would know the Quran, we would know the Sunnah. We don't know Allah were it not for the Prophet ﷺ, and He is the source of all. And so it's significant that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala made a man, a person, even being, kind of the source, also to show us that it's not an impossible thing. And then He gave us the Quran in letters and words that we know that is used as the communication between human beings. And this is one of the secrets behind it, huruf al-muqatta'. Right, the beginning letters in some of the chapters, like Surah Al-Baqarah, Alif Lam Mim, and Surah Ali Imran, and Kaf Ha Ya Ain Sad, and Surah Maryam, and so forth, Taha. All of these letters are like issuing a challenge. Number one, saying, "Oh, you who know this language, can you make something like it?" And here are the building blocks. The letters do something like it. And also to say, what we're communicating to you is that which you know. Just like Adam was created from clay, of the earth, of materials, right, that can be found in nature, and just like the language that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala communicates to us with letters that can be found in language that we communicate with, but yet we are incapable of summoning those letters and making words like Allah has done, just as we're incapable of summoning the natural elements around us, right, or the four basic elements of earth, water, and wind and fire, and making them together and fashioning a human being out of that, or fashioning life. So, as is above is below, as they say, the macrocosm and the microcosm, as the cosmos above and then the cosmos below. The cosmos in the celestial realm, and also the cosmos within the atom, and the system of protons and electrons in the subatomic quantum world or realm. So all of these, awalim, right? Allah Rabbul Alameen, He is the Lord of all of them, all of these particular worlds, and there's a synchronicity, right, between all of them. There is this line that you can draw from one to another, and you see the similarities in all of them, but all of them in turn are completely distinct and different from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala left his mark, so to speak. So, he's left us a breadcrumb trail that is, if we're looking for it, is quite easy to find. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So the next section, في نفي الحركة والسكون عن الله. So the negation of movement and stillness from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So he says, فالحركة والسكون لا يصحان إلا من تعاقب الأعراض على الأجسام والجواهر، لأن الأجسام والجواهر محل الأعراض، فإذا حلت الأعراض والجواهر بالأجسام تحركت، وإذا ارتحلت عنها سكنت، والله سبحانه ليس بجوهر ولا عرض، فإن الجوهر يمس والعرض يحس. يمس والعرض يحس. So this is also kind of using a very ancient argument that you even found amongst the Greek logicians, which is to talk about movement and stillness. And so we say that a created thing is in one of those two states. Either you're moving or you're at rest, right? And it's also a postulate of physics, right? Either the body is moving or the body is at rest, and there's no third category. So here he's negating both of those for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And maybe at first glance we might say, well, maybe Allah is at rest, he's not moving. But he's going to negate that. So he says, Al-haraka wa sukun la yasihhan, they're not valid. Movement and stillness are not valid, except for one, من تعاقب الأعراض أو من تعاقب الأعراض على الأجسام والجواهر. So he defines movement and stillness as attributes, right? Like colors and attribute, black or white, red, blue, doesn't matter. And movement and stillness are attributes. So these attributes are only valid, or not valid from anything except من تعاقب الأعراض على الأجسام والجواهر. For those here, al-ajsam, which is a composite body, right? So it's something that's made up of other indivisible atoms, like a table or a chair or me and you. We say that's a jism. So a jism is something that has parts. Wal jawahir, and the jawhar is also an ancient rendering of what we would call atom today. Something that is undividable or indivisible and is like a single entity. So whether it's a jism or whether it's a jawhar, it's going to have properties or attributes. It's going to have size and length and color and stillness or movement. So it's either going to be still or it's going to be moving. So stillness and movement then is only going to work for something that has ta'aqubul a'rad, right? So the continuous succession of different attributes. So one moment it's at rest, another time it's moving, then it's at rest, then it's moving again, then it might move a little bit, then it may stop, so forth. This is called ta'aqub, right? So a continuous succession of change, basically, right? So the arad, or the attribute or the property, is something that's in the constant state of flux. It's always changing. So this is the reason for this, because al-ajsam wal jawahir mahal al-arad. So the composite body and the singular entity are always going to be defined by particular attributes, right? In terms of these physical attributes, I should say, because we're going to talk later on, obviously, about the divine attributes, which are completely different. But physical attributes only apply to physical entities. Hence, Allah is not a physical entity, so it doesn't apply to him. فإذا حلت الأعراض والجواهر بالأجسام تحركت. So if a particular property is then contained within a body or within a singular entity, like stillness or movement, so either then, if stillness is applied to the body, it is still. If movement comes to it as a property, then it moves. وإذا ارتحلت عنها سكنت, right? And if the movement property leaves, then it's left in its another state, which would be stillness, which is lack of movement, right? Because they're actually polar opposites. That's why you can't be still and moving at the same time. This is what we call polar opposites, or naqidan, as they say in Arabic. So they can't both coexist. There are other types of opposites that can coexist, but these type of opposites cannot coexist. So movement and stillness. والله سبحانه ليس بجوهر ولا عرض. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is not a jawhar, is not a single entity, a physical one like that, nor is he an attribute, nor is he a property. Right? Because الجوهر يمس والعرض يحس. Because the jawhar can be touched, is physical. And that Allah is not that. So it's not a singular entity like that or a composite body. والعرض يحس. Right? And the arad can be perceived. The property can be perceived, whether stillness or movement or color or length or direction or size. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala doesn't fall into any of those categories. والعالم بأسره على ضربين لا ثالث لهما. And the world, the universe, is two things, right? Or these two categories. ساكن ومتحرك. Either the body is moving or it's at rest. It's still. There's no third category in the universe. فإذا اتصف العالم بأسره بالحركة والسكون والعالم بحركته وسكونه صنعة من صنائع الله سبحانه فاعلم أن الصنعة لا تشبه صانعها بصفة ولا حال. So if the whole universe then is defined by these two properties, at least in one aspect of moving or stillness, and these were created by Allah, then Allah cannot be like His creation, right? So then we go back to the commanding verse, ليس كمثله شيء وهو السميع البصير. So Allah is not like anything in creation. ولو اتصف الباري سبحانه بالحركة والسكون لكان فوقه محرك يحركه ومسكن يسكنه وتتصل العقول بمعرفة صفاته لأن العقول تتأتى منها معرفة الحركة والسكون لأنهما من صفات المحدثات والحركة والسكون ينقطعان وينعدمان من أجل العلل الداخلة عليهما لأن الحركة تبطل وتنعدم عند مجيء السكون والسكون يبطل ويعدم عند مجيء الحركة وكل صفة تبطل وتعدم فهي محدثة وصفات الله لا تبطل ولا تعدم ولا تتغير لأنها صفات الكمال. So, nice way he puts it here. It kind of goes into a little bit maybe more detail than what is needed, but it's good reference. So he says, if Allah then had this property of movement or stillness, then there would have to been some other being that would move him or make him still, or in other words, remove or withdraw movement from him, then he would be left still. Because that's how we see it in the universe, right? Something, even the astronomers, when they looked at the planetary movements and orbits, they said, what's moving it? Or they said, what keeps the planets from bumping into each other? And then they devised or postulated this idea of gravity, right? That there are four unseen forces, which is basically what gravity is. It's an unseen force that keeps the planets from crashing into each other. And then they have certain orbits. At first, they postulated that they were circular, right? So Ptolemy thought that they were circular orbits. And then he thought, obviously, that the Earth was the center of the universe and everything else revolved around it. Until Copernicus came. But before Copernicus, there were Arab Muslim astronomers who also postulated the idea of a heliocentric universe, where the solar system, where the sun is the center, and then everything else kind of circumambulates around the sun. And then they postulated circular orbits first, and then it wasn't until Newton's laws and then Galileo with gravity that they said, well, they're not perfectly circular, they're actually elliptical and not in the perfect sense that we thought. And they had devised too many exceptions to the rule for the system to make sense. And then they postulated the idea that it was particular forces related to density and weight and that connection with gravity then that would determine the particular orbit of a celestial body. So they realized that there had to be some explanation to it and what was moving it or keeping it still. So if we were to say that Allah moves or is kept still, then we'd have to say, well, what moves Allah and what keeps him still? And then that thing would be the God, right? Not the God, not Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is what he's saying. So he also says, that الحركة والسكون ينقطعان وينعدمان من أجل العلل الداخلة عليهما لأن الحركة تبطل وتنعدم عند مجيء السكون. Also because he said from the inherent illa, right, which means like what we consider to be a defect, because perfection would mean a dawam, right? Defection would mean permanence, but nothing is permanently moving and nothing is permanently still. There's kind of like something, sometimes this and sometimes that. So, and when I say that, I don't mean like you might say, well, isn't the earth always moving and it's never still? But here we're looking at possibilities. So we can conceptualize the earth stopping on its axis. We can conceptualize the earth not rotating around the sun. So here it's the possibility of conceptualizing it. So the ilal, the inherent defect in them means that when movement stops, right, then stillness comes about. So it means the removing of movement, and now that thing becomes still. So that means it was never a permanent state. And we understand properties and attributes. Part of the understanding of them being perfect is that they have permanence. And so since they don't have permanence, that means haraka, or movement, is temporary state, and then stillness is temporary state. So they are invalidated by one another. That's why we say you can't be at rest and moving at the same time. So one is invalidating one at the other time. So كل الصفة تبطل وتعدم فهي محدثة. So every property or attribute that doesn't have permanence, right, that can be removed by another attribute, another property, then we say that it's muhdatha, right? It is something that is temporal, ephemeral, and it doesn't have permanence. وصفات الله تعالى لا تبطل ولا تعدم ولا تتغير. And Allah's attributes, the divine attributes, never change. They're immutable. They're perfect. So they don't go in and out. They're always there. لأنها صفات الكمال, because they are the attributes of completeness and perfection. فلما وجدت العقول أنه لا تجوز عليه الحركة والسكون عجزت عن التكييف والصفات لأن العقول لا تعرف إلا الحركة والسكون ولا تعرف لهما ثالثا أصلا والله الموفق للصواب. And here's an important point he makes at the end. He said, so when our intellects realized that it's conceptually impossible, logically impossible for Allah to be moving or to be at rest, and then it didn't know the modality, عجزت عن التكييف, right, of how that actually is, because our minds can only conceptualize movement and stillness, and it doesn't know a third category. So that's why we have to have this idea of tafweed, right, and of admitting to ourselves we can't properly understand Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in all of his glory and all of his majesty. That's why when we read the Quran and we see the refrain of some of the disbelievers of the prophets, like the prophet Moses and the children of Israel said to him, Arina Allah jahra, show us Allah jahra, show us Allah like physically. Or when Pharaoh said to Moses, Wama Rabbul Alameen, he didn't say who is Rabbul Alameen, he said what is Rabbul Alameen. And then he told Haman, Ibn li sarhan la'alli atasab ilahi Musa. He told his top general, build me a bridge, a sky bridge that I can get to the God of Moses. So he thought he was some physical entity high up somewhere. They didn't, their aql, and that's why there's this relationship between arrogance and disbelief, because part of belief is to humble yourself and say, I can't actually know everything exactly as it exists. I don't have the capability to do that, but I do know enough, and Allah has given me enough of mental faculty, intellectual faculty, to understand that Allah exists. But to understand every single aspect about divinity and about His majesty, that's not a rational exercise. That's why we begin with this. This is why it's called the path of the Arifin. To get to a greater understanding of the kamal, of the perfection of God, this is where rationality is not going to help us out anymore, because we only think in the frames of movement, stillness, black, white, that sort of thing. We tend to try to eliminate things from or invalidate things in terms of how we understand things. And there's nothing invalid about Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And at the same time, we can't properly put him in a frame that we can rationalize. So we say that then the path to truly knowing Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is more spiritual in nature, or what we call super rational, not irrational. So we're not negating the intellect. We're not saying the intellect is wrong, and so I'm just going to believe in unbelievable things. No, we're saying, we've gotten to, if you think that the knowledge of God is like you have to get to the high tower that's in the castle, that's behind the moat, that you have to cross the fields to get to it. So, our intellect, well, let's call it our horse, and it gets us as far as the moat, right? And we can see there's a castle, and we can see that there's something really going on inside, but our horse can't traverse the moat, can't get over the body of water. And it's a place where our intellect is not going to serve us as we thought it would. I should say our rationality, not our intellect. So our rationality is not going to serve us as we thought it would. So at this point, then, we're going to rely more on our spirituality. So, delving into, what we've done here so far, these are actually issues of what we call theological discourse, kalam, but in a very simplified way, not to try to confuse people. But there are other books that are, encyclopedic in terms of how far they delve into these issues, which we say for most people that's not necessary, or the vast majority of people it's not necessary to delve in that much detail. It's a fard kifaya. It's something like a communal obligation, and some people have to study it, but it's not for everyone to kind of delve into it, because it's not going to help you get a greater knowledge of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in that sense. What's going to help you get to be a true knower of Allah, such as that, each of your the way you keep your composure, and the way that you deal with other human beings and other creatures of this earth created by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, is informed by your knowledge of God, then that's a spiritual path. That's not necessarily a path of rationality. But the beginning, right, as we're beginning here, we want to build on sound foundation, right, sound intellectual foundation, and this is what the author is doing here. So I hope that's clear, inshallah, and I hope it's not too tedious. And hopefully we'll get through more of it. And it's kind of easier as we go along, because you're going to go through some of the verses in the Quran that might give us more insight into this. So, Jazakumullah khair. I will stop here.